Welcome to another broadcast of the Deborah Ruffini Show on the Artist First Radio Network. All past shows are archived. You can find them at artistfirst.com. And now, from England, here she is, your host, Deborah Ruffini.
Greetings from England. This is Deborah Ruffini with another broadcast of the Deborah Ruffini Show. Today it is my pleasure to be speaking with Michael P. Hayes of Critical Mass Ministries, where we shall be discussing various matters relating to the existence of God. Great to have you on the show, Michael. How are you doing?
Oh, wonderful, Deborah.
That's
very happy to be with you today.
Oh, well, likewise, because to the audience, I was quite impressed with what Michael had to say online. And as I've mentioned in previous shows, although I'm a believer, I mustard seed faith, as I mentioned to you, Michael, didn't I? And it's so I'm always rather impressed and interested with people who have a big mind and big belief in the existence of God. So I'm more than happy to be speaking with you, Michael. So
I'm very happy to be.
Wonderful. So tell us, have you always been a believer?
Say that again, please.
Oh, sorry, Michael. Have you always been a believer?
No. My sort of career goal out of high school was to go into some kind of sorcery, witchcraft.
Wow.
And more like a shaman or medicine man. I was beginning to learn the stuff, and I knew it was real. The power is real.
Yeah.
And do you want me to go into my story? What happened?
If you feel you could, yeah, that would be appreciated. It would be interesting, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I didn't care about God. I wasn't looking.
Okay.
Like I said, I was pursuing a different avenue of power. And being high was normal. I moved to a town called Sharon, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And on a Friday night in September of 1978, I was going to go take a bath and spend the night being high like usual. And there was a thunderstorm going on outside. I was 22 years old.
Right.
And the house was empty, so I was going to have it to myself. And while I was kicking back in the bathtub, I began to, it sounded like somebody was downstairs in the kitchen talking.
Right.
But I couldn't make out what was being said, so I focused my attention on the voices so I could try and hear what was being said. One voice. And as soon as I focused my attention, it roared out, "And the Almighty God." And in an instant, it was like a bolt of lightning hit the window.
Wow. The
house shook from the thunder. The whole room turned this pure white light. And I was in the presence of more power than I could have ever imagined.
Wow. That's quite something.
But what was so unusual, in the spirit world, most power is intimidation. It's more like domination. But what was so different of this power was that there was the most gentle peace. And that was such an odd contradiction.
Yeah.
Awesome power and gentle peace. And those just didn't go together. And so I kind of sat up and I said, "Okay, God, you got my attention. What do you want?"
Wow.
And instantly I was above the earth looking down, and the whole of the earth was like a wheat field.
Right.
And horizon to horizon was just wheat. And as I was looking at it over the horizon, I began to see it turn kind of reddish, and then it got brighter. And up over the horizon came this firestorm.
Wow.
It was devouring everything in its path. and it was just burning up the wheat. And instantly I knew every one of those stalks of wheat was a life, a person.
Okay.
And God let me feel how he feels. Every lost life is a tragedy to him. I mean, we all know John 3:16. I didn't know it back then, but for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. He loves people.
Yeah.
Loves his creation. He made it to be enjoyable. But these lives were being destroyed, and all, like every stalk of wheat had a face. And those lives were being destroyed, and just this like flood of tears of the tragedy that this was.
Yeah.
And I said, God, if even one of those people can live because of me, I'll do whatever you want.
Oh, wow.
And it's like
gracious.
The whole. Go ahead.
That's very gracious, Michael. Yeah.
I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know I was saying yes. I didn't know anything about Christianity except some of the early Catholic upbringing that I had. I didn't know about the gospel. I didn't know any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But when I said, if even one of those people can live because of me, I'll do whatever you want. It's like the whole thing just ended. It just folded all up, and I was back in the bathroom, the light and the power, and it was all gone. And I finished my bath and went to bed. I should have been high all night.
Yeah.
But I was instantly sober.
Oh, my goodness.
And so I went to bed. And when I woke up the next morning, I was different. I don't know how else to explain it. I'd never heard about being born again that I know of. But I knew that I was in the presence of God, and he did something to me. I mean, to this day, this is 43 years later.
Wow.
That the detail is just as vivid in my mind right now as it was back then.
I suppose something like that would change your life completely, wouldn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a course of life kind of planned out for myself, and God had a different plan.
Yeah. And
he didn't ask me, but I did agree. And when I said, I'll do whatever you want, that was my agreement. That was my word. That was the bond.
Yeah.
But I knew I was different. He said, I'd never heard about being born again. But I knew that God did something. It wasn't for, 10 days, 2 weeks. It exploded into my consciousness that whatever the Bible says is true.
Yeah.
That this is God's book. I didn't get that from man. I got that from God.
Okay.
That the Bible is his book. And that Jesus Christ was the key to everything. Wow. And I really didn't understand what either of those meant at the time, but I knew it. I knew it, as sure as I'm breathing, that the Bible is absolutely true. And I became absolutely committed to the Bible. An old girlfriend had given me a family Bible, but I had no use for it. So I say it's still in the box, in the closet, under the blankets, because I didn't want to throw it away out of respect for her, but I had no use for it.
Yeah.
And I knew I had to get that book out, and I had to learn. And so I did, and I carried it everywhere. I quit jobs so I could have more time reading. That's not very smart, but...
Excellent. No, I think it's very smart. That's very smart. Yeah.
I wanted to know that book.
Yeah.
And I needed to know that book. And I came up with, I'd read, and there's a lot of things in the Bible that it plainly contradicts a lot of our normal way of thinking about things. And we come to these choices. And it was just like Eve in the garden. God said, if you eat the fruit, you're going to die.
Mm.
In Genesis chapter 3, the serpent came along and said, if you eat the fruit, you won't die.
Yeah.
So we have a contradiction.
Mm.
That who do you believe?
Yes,
And people every day are faced with that I call it Eve's choice. Are we going to believe God and His Word, or are we going to believe some other thing? And I use a definition for faith, that faith is trust in an authority.
Yeah.
It's belief that you put into action. So what authority? I mean, there's all kinds of authorities out there. And as human beings, we're sort of naturally aligned to trusting authorities.
Yes.
Little children, we trust our parents. But that can be damaged, that kind of trust, because authorities are unworthy of that kind of trust.
Mm.
And so it can get damaged, and almost all of us have a damaged faith.
Yes. Yeah.
But the more you get to know God, and this is a huge difference, that most people have a belief about God. They don't know Him personally. And that makes all the difference. Because the more you get to know Him, the more you find out. I mean, after 43 years now, Jesus has been my best friend.
Wow.
For years.
That's
and
cool.
I've done. He has stuck with me. He is a faithful friend, but He's also Lord and Creator of the universe.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of a tension in there that it is His way, but it's not my way or the highway kind of an attitude. He's not looking for reasons to get rid of people. He's looking for reasons to keep them. And the Father loves us. I mean, this is where, back to, for God so loved the world. His whole creation and redemption and dominion is all rooted in His love.
Yeah.
And He goes to great lengths to have demonstrate that love. And a lot of people go to great lengths to ignore it or cover it up or all kinds of things that we do.
Do you think that there are some people who genuinely don't see God rather than do, but want to sort of dismiss Him and keep Him?
Yes.
Do you?
Oh, very, very certainly. People go to great lengths. And you can read that in John chapter 3.
Yeah.
And in fact, it starts with that verse, for God so loved the world. And as you read on from John chapter 3, 16 to 21, Jesus is saying that the light has come into the world, but men loved darkness.
Yeah.
And refused to come to the light. And that is, it's a mystery to me why people would want to refuse the best thing that could possibly happen to them.
Yeah.
I was, in my early days, I was pretty obnoxious because I couldn't understand why anybody would not want to hear the truth, so I went way overboard to try and give it to them.
Yeah.
You know, it's to generate lots of heat and very little light. I was pretty argumentative, and some of that still remains today, but it's quite a bit more refined, hopefully.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, as we've spoken before, Michael, we sort of touched on some people who claim to be atheists. It's more that they've been harmed in the name of the faith, or by people in the name of the faith, which is very tragic. Let's go on to sort of like fascinating stuff, cause and effect. And I was reading your website last night, and you've got some really interesting things on there. And I think it's encouraging for skeptics and people who have a sort of doubting Thomas type of
Sure.
thing going on there. So evidence for God. What would if Richard Dawkins came to you? I don't want to wish this on anybody, but if Richard Dawkins came to you and said, "Oh, come on, Michael, surely you don't," but that's my Dawkins voice. "Come on, Michael, surely you don't believe that nonsense." What would you give to him as the best evidence for God?
I'm not sure that I could, and let me talk a little bit about some of the foundation. I mean,
yeah,
root level foundations, and it has to do with the way of thinking. And let me say, first of all, Romans chapter 1, verses 16 through about 23. It says that God has revealed himself to every person such that they are without excuse.
Yeah.
So when they say they don't believe in God, what we should be hearing is that this person is self-deceived.
Okay.
And you think about somebody like Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of books, letters after his name, PhD, and he's written all these books. He's the head, I think he's retired now, from the chair of the public understanding of science kind of stuff. There is a lot of pride.
Yes.
A lot of ego.
Oh, yeah.
And he knows the kind of ridicule that he has dished out over the decades.
Yeah, yeah.
And for him to admit that God is real and that evolution is a lie is a devastating blow to his ego. And he cannot. Even if when he lays his head down on the pillow, he knows that it's all true, he can't admit it because he knows what will happen to him if he does. And there's a lot of people, particularly college professors and writers of books, and, there's a lot on the line, and they know it. For many of them, it'll cost them their job. And that is something that they are unable to even manage. And so they set up this superstructure of atheistic, evolutionary way of thinking as like a castle with the drawbridge drawn up. Nobody gets in, nobody gets out. And so let me get down to this foundational thing again.
Yeah.
I use a box as a metaphor. I call it nature's box.
Yeah.
And in nature's box is everything about the material world.
Okay.
From the outer reaches of the cosmos to our physical bodies to subatomic particles. Everything and all the laws that govern the physics and chemistry and all that governs that natural world. It's the whole natural universe, and this box is to the atheist nothing else exists. Only chemistry and physics, matter, energy, time, and space-time more modernly. And there is nothing outside the box.
Yeah.
All that, and they're prisoners in this box. They're prisoners of the material world.
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
And their mind cannot even go outside that box.
Yeah.
Because that's all that does exist. It's been drummed in. They've repeated it to themselves so often. And this is how self-deception comes in. And I looked at some of your stuff on the religious abuse and that kind of stuff. And it's what has to happen inside of a person to get to that place to where they can be an abuser.
Yes.
And not be bothered by it. That's the sort of stage 4 cancer of the whole thing. They're not bothered by it. Their conscience is now dead. At some point, they knew that it was wrong, but at some later point, it never occurs to them ever again.
Yeah.
And the atheists often get into that. And as alluded to earlier, many of the prominent atheists in the last couple hundred years were, or at least claimed to have, a Christian background.
Yes, that's true.
Karl Marx himself was raised in a Christian background. Something happened that turned him really hard.
Yeah.
And has led half the world's population into a disaster of Marxism, communism, socialism, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's all rooted in the fact there's nothing outside the box.
It's interesting.
Well, there is.
Yeah.
Because there is no God, there is no supernatural of any form, of any kind. There cannot exist any non-material objects.
So
there cannot exist anything that isn't under the effects of chemistry, physics, time and space. Nothing can exist. And one of the things we know about everything natural is that it decays. Everything. I mean, your car while you drive down the road is evaporating.
Yes.
And rust, all of that stuff. That everything in the natural world decays. And so we have this, and I call it, it's a temporal world. It exists in time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of discussion about what time is, but whatever it is that we live in a universe that is decaying.
Yeah.
It is aging. But on the flip side of that, and part of the definition of something that exists in time is that it changes. Everything in this box changes. But on the flip side of that is the eternal world outside the box, which according to the atheist doesn't exist. But that is the realm of God. Now he interacts, he's intimately connected with his creation, but his world is outside of space and time. It's called transcendent. God is a transcendent being.
Yeah.
That's where he lives. He lives outside of time and space. And so one of the attributes of God is called that he's immutable. He does not change. Everything in the box is changing.
Yeah.
Stuff outside the box is not changing.
I'm intrigued as to maybe you can shed some light on this, that if we are purely the materialistic, and I can move my arm and my brain is subconsciously telling my arm to move up and down, but there's something in us that makes us self-aware, isn't there? I mean, that's something, yes. The consciousness is completely different to our, whatever it is, what is it, the brain that sends a chemical down to move this part of the body or that part of the body. We would only just be walking around like zombies if it wasn't for our consciousness.
One atheist said, I was pointing out how religious atheists are. Atheism is a religion. And he goes, no, our only belief is that there is no God. Well, it's like they have, this particular person had no concept of that belief has implications.
Yeah, yeah.
If there is no God, if there is no supernatural world, then all that can, and it's called materialism. Materialism, we often think of, street level as gathering a bunch of stuff, but the metaphysical idea of materialism is there is no supernatural. And so the atheism denies, since there can be no non-material objects, atheism denies all the classical understandings of the spirit, soul, of the mind. And there's a bunch of them that deny they exist. So
Right.
if all that exists is chemistry,
Yeah.
then all of our thoughts, all of our actions, me moving my arm,
Yeah.
are 100% chemical reactions in the brain. That's the places it all starts.
Yeah.
And so all thoughts and actions follow chemical reactions. Well, you've got no will. You can't make those chemical reactions do something else. So all these words coming out of my mouth right now are nothing more than a long series of chemical reactions
Yeah.
over which I have no control whatsoever.
Yeah.
It is an illusion that we have a mind and we think. Because all thoughts and intentionality is nothing more than an illusion. And all of this stuff has consequences. This is part of what's happening to our legal systems around the world, particularly Western legal systems, is if you're not really responsible for your actions, then how can we punish you?
Yes.
Because punishment implies an intentionality and a culpability. You are responsible. But if all you are is chemistry, and all of your behaviors are just chemical reactions, then there is no you to be responsible. And there is, different people have written on crisis in the whole legal world, is what that means for law and order, which, by the way, also don't exist.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
In the postmodern views called post-structural, the structure has, the whole illusion of law and order has been imposed by people in power, so we need to get rid of that stuff. And so things are becoming more chaotic, and there's a direct connection between, as the God of law and order gets pushed further and further out of people's thinking, well, what does remain? Who decides?
Yeah.
What standard do we decide what is right and wrong?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is huge. Even assuming a semblance of law and order, which, by the way, if there is no God to keep things orderly, then the only thing left is the state. And this is the heartbeat of socialism. Since there is no God, it is up to the state to impose order. Otherwise, things have become chaotic.
Yeah.
Even the order is part of the modern Enlightenment concepts of things. So even that's got to go in the postmodern world. And so we're becoming more tribal. This stuff all has consequences.
It does.
And it goes back, and I'd say politics is nothing more than an expression of religion. But whose religion? Who is it that gets to decide the moral philosophy that is going to affect the legislatures?
Yeah.
The parliament. How are they going to decide what's right and wrong? And what will be put into law? That's kind of the final step, is when governments start putting in law. And so all law is somebody's moral philosophy being imposed on everybody else.
Yes. Yeah.
And you'll hear them say, oh, don't impose your morals on me. Well, somebody is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody's morals are being imposed on everybody. And it comes out of this. And Leon Trotsky, one of the architects of the Bolshevik Revolution, said that atheism is socialism, and socialism is atheism.
Yeah.
Stood. If there is no God, then the state is the only one. And the state owns everything. In socialism, they say the soft version is that the state owns the reproduction. That's with a slight economic spin to it. But the truth is that in socialism, the state owns everything. There is an agency in the American government to handle everything. Waters, air, airwaves, the stuff that the airplanes fly, ground. Every part has an agency to manage it of our lives. That is socialism.
Yeah. Going back to
yes, ma'am.
Sorry, just something that's I wanted to ask you on this because it's something that's always baffled me. Evolution.
Yes.
I don't personally understand, unless I'm completely missing the point and being a bit thick. I don't understand that if the atheists harping on about evolution, why do they believe that evolution makes God redundant?
Well, that's kind of an afterthought.
Right.
But if you're an atheist, there is no God to start with. And so you have to explain how we got here somehow.
But that still doesn't explain it, does it? Evolution could just be the process.
Well,
sorry.
If there is no God,
yeah,
and we're here, we got here somehow.
Okay.
And that's hyper simplistic, but if there is no God and we're here, we have to come up with an explanation. And that's, by the way, is what the Enlightenment was all about.
Okay.
Enlightenment wasn't a scientific revolution as it is commonly portrayed. And by the way, liberals and leftists often name a thing in kind of a euphemistic manner so that it sells to the general public.
Right.
The Enlightenment was an atheistic revolution. It was the origin of organized atheism. You hear a lot of times, the people don't like organized religion.
Yeah.
Well, there is a religion that is more deadly than all of the other world's religions combined, and that is atheism.
Yeah. Yeah.
300 million dead around the world in the last 125 years at the feet of organized atheism.
Yeah.
Which is astonishing. That's more people than have died in every religious war in all of human history combined in 125 years.
Wow.
And so that's the idea of, let's see, where were you going? What was? Ask your question again.
Yeah, the fact that they seem quite proud that they found this thing called evolution that makes God redundant.
So this starts with, and that was part of the Enlightenment. The purpose of the Enlightenment was to find a way to explain everything without God.
Yeah.
Because and unfortunately, the church opened this door. In the Protestant Reformation, they saw Catholics and Protestants beating each other's brains out, and a bunch of them decided there was no God. How could they be doing that? How could they do that to each other? In the name of God.
Yeah.
And it opened this door to atheism. And in the early 1700s, this began as it wasn't called the Enlightenment then, but the atheist philosophers, one of the early ones is David Hume. And all of them began to try to explain how things could be without God.
Right.
And there was an evolutionary theory 100 years before Darwin.
Okay.
In fact, Darwin's grandfather was an evolutionist before Darwin was.
Oh, right.
But the idea is that if we can explain stuff from God, then he is no longer needed.
problem.
But the truth is, nobody can explain anything apart from God. Without God, nobody can explain stuff anyway. There are explanations offered.
Yeah.
But as we get further down into the foundations of these things, and yet I believe there's some evidence for modern evolution.
Mm.
But that evidence is highly selected and highly filtered. Very, very few people get to see the actual data. What they are seeing is an interpretation and a conclusion based on what they believe before they ever even start. So if you need billions of years for evolution, then you need to find some scientific stuff that provides billions of years. And radiometric dating is one of those. That's a fairly recent development. But at the time of Darwin, they had developed the geologic column on the presumption, presupposition, that life started as simple and gradually became more complex through the ages. And so they built up this geological column with certain fossils in each layer that they believed a later layer had more complex creatures than an earlier layer. And from that, the geologic column being established, that was calibrated against the radiometric dating. So when they did a radiometric test, it was tested against the column to see how close it was. And they kind of refined each other over time. But it's still based on the presupposition. This is a magical word, presupposition. What you believe before you ever even start doing your science determines what you see as the results, as the evidence. You interpret the evidence based on the beliefs you already have.
Yeah, that's very true.
Evidence is a very poor leader. They say, well, we'll follow the evidence.
Yes.
No, they don't. They don't.
But the interesting thing, evolution may shed light on what happens once we have life, but that's not shedding any light on the origins of the universe, is it?
It doesn't. And even more so, it doesn't shed any light on the progression. Because again, that progression is based on the assumption evolution is tried. It's called circular reasoning, or begging the question.
I'm with you.
They believe evolution is true, so they find fossils that they can line up in a certain order, like everybody's seen the apes to humans silhouetted picture, a symbol of human development.
But is it true that they
assuming that evolution is true to start with? And if you're an atheist, you have no choice but to believe in evolution.
Yeah.
They have dominated the sciences for 100 years.
Is it true that they found no transitional forms in the fossil record?
One atheist, I'm trying to remember his name now. He said that the rarity of transitional forms is the trade secret of paleontologists.
Oh, okay.
That they are, and they're, even if you find one that looks like it could be in between, there's no, how would you prove it? You can believe it that this is a transition from one form to another, because it has a similarity. A lot of the most prominent ones are the supposed human ancestors, because they have some human-like features.
Yeah.
But you can't prove that it is, that it's not a separate species, or what we see in genetics is degeneration. we don't see it increasing complexity.
No.
And you can't know that from the fossil record. You can believe it, and this is where what you believe ahead of time, you impose it on there.
Yeah.
Like the whale, some kind of pig, dog creature evolved into a whale. And there's like 4 or 7 skeletons in 50 million years that prove it. That's the claim.
Yeah.
But there's no proof there. There's imagination. There is the presupposed belief that one kind of creature turns into another kind of creature. But how could you prove that fossil even had any offspring?
Yeah. Yes.
Let alone a different offspring.
Yeah. And there's
they have to have, because now we know about how genetic mutations and how often they occur. And in the 1940s, there were supposedly like 6 independent proofs that the universe was 2 billion years old.
Right.
And then in the 1950s, Watson and Crick showed the spiral helix, and then in the late 50s and 60s began, one of the first things they needed was to know how fast does DNA mutate.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole basis of evolutionary theory. And they found out 2 billion years is not long enough. We have to come up with some more billions of years in the universe, or at least on Earth, to account for more time for mutations to happen. Because now we're doing actual science. We're measuring mutation rates. Whereas 100 years earlier, a cell was like a little blob of jello or something. They had no concept. Today we know that a cell has 10,000 nano machines in it.
Wow.
Each of which has to evolve purely by accident. That's one of the other pieces of it. Every change has to be by pure accident.
Yeah, yeah.
Chance random process. And there's 10,000 of these that all have to happen at the same time to come together to form even the simplest cell that we know about. Has to have thousands of accidents, proper accidents.
Yeah. All
moving in the same direction. It has no idea. Evolution is completely mindless. It doesn't know that it's turning this leg into a wing.
Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't know that. And it doesn't know when it's finished. That's another one of those miracles that evolution needs. Evolution is loaded with miracles. And that's sometimes why people will say, well, God did it. God used evolution. But that goes totally against the character of God.
Yeah.
He's the God of life and care and order, and evolution is based totally on the extinction of the less fit. Death is the rule of evolution.
Yes. Yeah.
The less fit must give way to the more fit. Especially when you're talking about scarce resources.
Talking about, sorry, Michael? Especially when...
Sorry?
What was that last thing you said? Especially when we're talking about...
Scarce resources.
Scarce resources, okay, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
The lions go after the stragglers and the weak ones.
Yeah.
Hanging out on the edge of the herd. They're not going after the strong ones.
No. Yeah, like you say, it's one accident plus another accident produces order.
Yes. We need 1 billion years of accidents to arrive at the human brain, which is, as far as we know today, is the most complex organized matter in the universe.
Yeah.
Know much about the rest of the universe. universe, but we know that on Earth, at least, that there is nothing as amazing as the human brain.
Yeah.
But underneath it's pure accidents, and it's all chemistry. Again, we're back to the words coming out of my mouth are chemically ordained.
Mm.
I have no free will. These words have to come out.
It's just madness, isn't it?
In my brain.
Yeah,
it is. And that's why the world is going crazy to embrace it.
Yeah, that's right.
It is a God of order. And what happens when you tell generation after generation of school children that you're just animals that exist for no reason?
Yeah.
Versus you are created in the image of God for a purpose that when your life is done, the world will be just a little better off.
Mm.
I mean, the psychology of that is enormous.
Yeah. Yes. That's right.
And you wonder why kids turn into little monsters. It's because we're telling them that they're monsters.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
And then the morality side of it is, again, we're back to that, is you can't tell them something is right and wrong because it's up to them to decide for themselves what's right and wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
It's even, according to Jean-Paul Sartre, we are so perfectly free that we have to figure out for ourselves, all by ourselves, who and what we are. That's why there's some places here in America that have 129 gender specifications.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
It's because I'm free to pick my own gender.
Yeah.
So the confusion just abounds.
And also, it dictates to us that fact when we've got to call certain people they, and I think, oh no, what if you say the wrong thing? Yeah.
Oh, but it's a big mystery. Ultimately, the big mystery is that they don't want God.
Yeah. It's so sad. I mean, I can't get my head around that, because surely we would want to embrace the thought of we were planned and we don't just become worm meat and fizzle out like a battery when we breathe our last, that we can go on into an eternal glory.
Yes. Well,
why would anyone not want to begin to believe that?
I think ultimately it is about self-centeredness.
Do you?
That when John the Baptist said, "Behold the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world," I think that core sin is self-centeredness.
Yeah.
That we, our pride, our even arrogance, our ego, that I would have to bow to the King.
Oh.
Just can't accept that. Can't allow that. And I've had actually people tell me, I will not bow to anyone.
Oh.
Good luck with that.
Really? Crumbs. I think they'll probably have no choice at the end of the day.
In final judgment, every knee will bow.
Yeah.
And when a person dies, they understand exactly that they were wrong. When Richard Dawkins dies, he will know perfectly that he was wrong.
Yeah.
But it's too late then.
He's actually said, hasn't he, that someone asked him, oh, I think you mentioned this actually, Michael, that someone asked Dawkins, what will you say to, if you are met with God when you die, what would you say to him? And Dawkins' answer was, I'll ask him why he didn't reveal himself or something, wasn't it?
Yes. That comes out of the Ben Stein.
Oh, that's it. Yes. Yeah.
No Intelligence Allowed video.
That's right. Yeah.
And he's does a documentary on the suppression of anything.
Yeah.
And he interviewed Dawkins towards the end of the video, and Dawkins was quoting Bertrand Russell.
Okay.
And he said, and that's where he said, "Why did you go to such lengths to hide yourself?"
Oh yes.
But what I see now is that everything that exists is proof for the existence of God.
Yeah.
Because without God, nothing can exist. This whole manufactured, and I'll put it into the Big Bang, the origin of life, the transformation of life through long ages, all of that is a fabrication to explain everything without God.
Yeah.
But Richard Dawkins, in his The Blind Watchmaker, on page 1, it says the study of biology. That biology is the study of complex things that look like they were designed for a purpose.
Right.
So Dawkins is recognizing design.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, out of the other side of his mouth is saying, God, why did you go to such lengths to hide yourself?
He does contradict himself a lot.
I mean,
yeah.
and if this were going to come to a court trial,
yeah.
Dawkins is his own worst witness.
Mm.
Because he is acknowledging design while denying the designer.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest, the study of nature used to be the cure for atheism.
Mm.
That's why evolution came in.
Yeah.
And I had a thing on, from the American Declaration of Independence, when we decided to separate from Mother Britain.
Okay.
And that, in the second paragraph down says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government, consent of the governed.
Mm.
And so this is like the footer underneath, this is America's founding document, acknowledging the Creator. And they set a pretty lofty goal that all men are created equal.
Yeah.
And they understood that. I mean, in America, that as well as Britain at that time, slavery was normal.
That's right, yes.
But they knew it. But they knew that it was going to come to an end. They also knew that if they challenged it openly, that there would be no. So they set this lofty goal that all men are created equal. They didn't evolve equal, because evolution, in fact, there's evolution guarantees racism. It guarantees it. And the heart of all modern racism of the last 150 years, 200 years, has been evolution. That there's a superior and an inferior.
Yes,
and
that's
the
true.
inferior are the gift of nature to the superiors.
Mm.
And it just, that was part of the justification. But
That's interesting.
that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So if you want to bring down a country, bring down America, you destroy the Creator in the minds of men. And that, to me, is why evolution exists. And which is their statement. They want to find a way to explain everything without God from the Enlightenment people.
Yeah.
To destroy this country, because this country is founded on an open declaration of acknowledgement to the Creator. And they know who that was. This is not an ambiguous Creator. They knew it was Jesus Christ.
Yes, yeah.
And the tier of influencers that influenced the authors of this were mostly preachers. A lot of them seminary trained.
Oh, wow.
And every person who signed this document was instantly branded as a traitor and had a contract put out on their life. And their families if they couldn't find them.
Oh,
and most of them lost their stuff.
Yeah.
And it finishes off, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, providence with a capital P. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's how it, and then all the signatures follow after that. With a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, because they had an understanding of providence that if what you do is right, God will back you.
Yeah.
And they knew it was right. And they listed their complaints, but there's a link to I formatted this in a way that makes it more easy on my website.
Yeah.
But it lists out all the complaints. This was almost like one long sentence in its original writing.
Okay.
So it's hard to read. So I formatted it so you could read the bullet points and numbers and all that stuff.
Oh, we'll have
but it was the acknowledgement of the Creator, which is almost exclusively denied in every public institution. If a teacher in a public school in America tries to introduce even the problems with Darwinism, and there's tons of them, they can be, they most likely won't get fired, but they will be censored.
Oh my goodness.
You are not allowed to challenge Darwin in public schools in America.
That's awful.
There's probably a few exceptions because sometimes it's up to the principal school, but in most cases, even students that have written papers on creation science their papers didn't go with the rest of the kids' papers.
Crikey, that's awful.
Different degrees of severity there.
Yeah. Oh, Michael, it's been wonderful to chat with you, and thank you for sharing your knowledge. Would it be okay to have the link to your website on the homepage?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Thank you so much for being here. It's been an absolute honour to chat with you. That's fascinating stuff. And
thank you so much for having me, Deborah.
Oh, you're more than welcome. And to the audience, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, much love and God bless.